Life of Love with Julie Hilsen.
Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Life of Love, where we gather each week and we cherish each other's company because we're here in connection to be curious about what a life of love looks like. And it's different every day. So we honor the bumps, we honor the smooth sailing days, and cherish our lives because they're a gift. So I have such gratitude for you tuning in and sharing these episodes. I'm just so thankful. And I'm applauding you for carving out this time and putting forth an intention of exploring life of love and also giving me the honor of having your ears and your eyes if you're watching on YouTube. So thank you, thank you. We're going to start with our intention and get it grounded here. So if you have the ability and you can close your eyes, go ahead. But if you're driving, please stay connected to your road. I'm just going to get centered in my heart and put my feet on the ground and connect to my breath. Dear God, thank you for this day, Creator. Thank you for bringing me the resources to produce this episode. And this wonderful soul, Albert, has joined us. I honor his team and his guides, and I ask our teams to collaborate as they see fit to bring forth a message for the highest good. Ooh, it's sparkly in there. I close my eyes and I'm seeing sparkles. That's always fun. So, yeah, we're holding space for this creation, for bringing forth this message, because being confident and embracing your divinity is part of our signature. Everyone has a unique signature, and we're all adding to this grid of light around the earth, around the creation. We're all divine beings. So being in your highest expression helps the whole world be of more light and love and harmony, grace, balance. This is what's all happening right now, and I can feel it. It's been a major shift this week. So I'm so excited to bring forth this message and give people permission. So our intention is to bring forth this message to help everyone illuminate their special light and honor each person's light, because everyone is a divine collaborator. And so we are holding space for this connection. We're holding space for the hearts that wish to soften to these messages, and the minds that might need to fall away and sink into the heart a little more. We're holding space for you. We're supporting you. And so with grace and love and clarity, and I ask the Holy Spirit to provide the intensity for the signal that needs to reach those ears and the hearts. And I thank you. I thank you, all my guides. I thank all Albert's team. And so it is. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, guys, what if you were fearless? You had no self-doubt and you owned your success. Albert shares with us how he conquered self-doubt and tapped into his authentic expression. So he's here to show and share his magic for living a life of love. Albert, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here and happy to join everybody.
Yes. Well, I'm just thrilled. And you have your fingers in a lot of different areas, but I think the most palpable place to start to give people a little perspective is that you help people who face the most rejection out of any career. I think it's probably the highest rejection career you can have is being an actor, right?
Yeah, well, show business just in general is one of the most challenging professions to be in. It's exciting and and it really is. Most of my clients or most of the actors that are doing this are really passionate about it. But the reality is that there is a lot of more no's than there are going to be yes. I mean, that's the way the business works. Sadly, because it's an overly saturated market. You have New York, where near, and my office is in New York, and there's several 100,000 actors in New York, and then you have Los Angeles, which is also even bigger than New York. And now in Georgia, you have Atlanta and the Southeast market, which is booming. And you have thousands of actors out there. So there's a limited number of jobs in reality. So one of the recent estimates by the Screen Actors Guild, and this is just for union actors only, at 97% do not meet the minimum income threshold to qualify for health insurance within a union. Currently, it's about $26,000 a year that you have to make from acting wages to get to qualify for health insurance for SAG-AFTRA, and 97% don't even meet that, which tells you that it's a profession that is really tough to get into. So most, if not all, actors need another job to help them sustain, like to get income. So many of my clients, work in catering, they work in real estate, they'll do it. Some teach, a lot go into consulting and some aspect just so they can subsidize, their acting, lifestyle, because living in these cities is not cheap either, especially in New York is like astronomical to
Mm.
even think about living there. So there's a lot of other expenses there. So and that's what makes it that adds a layer of difficulty there.
Sure, I imagine it, but that's it'd be one of those learned helplessness things, I would imagine, because that's part of having, success is owning that you earned it and that you deserve it. So, maybe that many times when you fail, you're just expecting to fail, and so you might have this mentality of, "Well, it's not gonna get any better, and you need to change your mindset." Tell me how your hypnosis and your path of learning how to overcome this default of I'm not good enough, I'm not going to make it, or even to put yourself out as your authentic self.
Hmm.
How did you how did you learn how to meld your skills in psychology and these three main pillars that you're a triple threat in? So yeah, this is the uniqueness that you bring. So I'd love to highlight that.
Yeah. Well, I never intended when I was younger, never intended that I or thought I was going to be in this business. I always was intended to be a clinical psychologist and be a college professor, which is I'm a college professor now, but I really thought that that was going to be my only path. Was just I was going to go straight up into psychology. If you told me a few years prior to graduating with my master's that being show business, I would think that you were absurd. And I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I'm still a little skeptical, but when I was younger, this is when I was in grad school, I went with a friend to a psychic. I was a little skeptical. I went into there, and one of the questions I asked her was, where do you see me working in, 10, 20 years? And without blinking, she said, I see you working in show business. And I laughed. And I remember walking out of that like this was really show business. It wasn't really until like, 5 years later that that started to materialize. But at that time, I was like, this is a waste of my time, a waste of my $25. And I was really mad at myself for spending, thinking that, like, okay, so now I remember kind of like because I went with a friend and I was just tapping to look at an old picture of that friend who I haven't seen for many years, and my hair stood up because now I remember that incident. I was like, whoa. But I never would have thought that. That's the whole gist of this. I never would have intended that. But I've always had an interest in the arts, and acting. In high school, I was in the drama club. I mean, I was one of those kids that was very involved in school, both high school and college, right? A lot of clubs, a lot of organizations. One of them in high school was a drama club for 3 years. And then I was also in college, I took some, intro to theater and acting one and two in as electives. And I really enjoyed it. It was fun. But that's all I looked at it. This is fun. Because I had to
It's a
take like
hobby. It's like
yeah,
a
I had to take some
diversion. Yeah.
credits to for electives. So I was like, okay. And I dismissed it. I was like, well, that was fun. But one thing that really stood with me, both high school and college, not so much the acting side. What I really felt was like camaraderie with the acting students, fellows, and even in the drama club. I really felt like these groups saw me and felt seen and heard and validated. And I never really got it, but I was like, I didn't think anything of it. My last semester in grad school, I wound up, at got an internship where I made a contact who um, had kind of introduced me to a lot of other filmmakers and producers. Sadly, after, this internship, 9/11 had happened. And, me being really close, I wanted to do something. I was like, I wasn't working at the time. I was just graduated with my master's degree. I wanted to be useful. So my contact had called me up and said, "Hey, we need, we're assembling a team of volunteers to provide crisis intervention and counseling." And amongst a lot of those team were actors, filmmakers, producers, and a lot of them were like, "Oh, you should audition for my film." I was like, "Well, all right." I took some acting in college. I did it, and it was fun. I was like, "Well, I'm in New York. Why not give this acting thing a try?" So, like most agents and casting directors or people that work in the industry, we all started out as performers. Most of us did. And I realized it wasn't for me, performing, and I didn't give it enough time. And, frankly, I wasn't that trained enough to do it. But what I realized is how much I liked being around actors. And it reminded me back from the earlier days. I was like, okay, I want to do something with this. I really feel like this is my calling. And so 2004, after some soul searching, I said, I'm going to open up my first talent agency. And so I did, I did the leap of faith and I became an entrepreneur right away. And I say leap of faith because most people on this path, like I would say 95% of all talent representatives start the conventional way, which is you intern at a bigger agency, you work for several years as a junior agent or a junior rep, and then you get promoted to the ranks. I've learned a lot of lessons, and I believe I was my destiny to try it this way and to do it this way. Um, because at least I get to say I did it my way, if you think about it. So now, how does this world combine? Now, to answer your question about it's all coming together, because right during this time when I started the company, I was teaching. And then I said, I'm not adding more to my plate. Let me go back for my PhD.
Yeah, like you're not busy enough.
Yeah, no, I'm not, of course not. But it was always since I was like a junior in high school, my goal was to be a PhD. To get a PhD, to be doctor, just at least have Dr. Albert Bramante by my name. So I was like, I'm halfway there. And if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. I was still in my late 20s at the time. Let me
Mhm.
do it. And so I enrolled, and I enrolled in an online university, Walden University. And just for anybody listening, online education is not easier, if anyone think that. It's actually, I think, even more demanding and tougher because there's no accountability there. You have to really be disciplined to do an online degree, so online learning. So I did that, and while the coursework was great. Now I'm a book nerd, and I'm a thinker. So for me, research papers was like fun. I could do them in my sleep. Sleep. I could crank out a 25 or 30-page research paper, and this is before we had AI. So I had to do it all from scratch.
Right. This is,
But I
yeah.
could crank out a 25 or 30-page research paper in 3 days. And it was a skill. It was like a real skill that I had.
And that's before
And they weren't bad.
Grammarly.
Not to do my own horn, I was getting some great grades on them too. So
Yeah.
so anyway, it came down from it to start planning our dissertation. Now this is a bane of most PhDs. The coursework was a breeze. This was not. And this is what really makes, I believe, this is what makes a PhD a distinguished degree. It's not the coursework; it's the dissertation. So we had to come up with, and what that is, we had to come up with an original problem to spend a lot of time solving. And so one of the things I was noticing with the actors I was working with were many of them were self-sabotaging, like shooting themselves in the foot. And I was like, okay, well, this relates to psychology at some level. So I remember when we had our first meeting to pitch our ideas for a dissertation, I said, and I just started really kind of improving here. I was like, well, here, I have this is going on. This is what I do. I want to know why these actors self sabotage. And I remember I never thought this. The committee of my university, I was in front of them, said, this is a great idea. And I went, okay, say no more. And so this was I guess the first way to bring two of my worlds together, and psychology with the love of acting. So that started that. Now, also, while I was knee deep in clinical psychology, because that was what initially enrolled in. I was accepted to the PhD program in clinical psychology. I did all my coursework. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training. Now, I love the field. I think it's so important. I think it's does great work. But there was one thing that was not aligning with me, and then many years of doing this, of studying this, was why people were taking so long to be in therapy, 8, 9,
Mm.
10 years, and making very little progress. Or some people were saying like therapy was kind of a life sentence, and it just didn't sit well with me. When I was going for my master's degree, I specialized in marriage and family therapy, and during that time, we learned solution focused short term therapy, because that's what really matters in family counseling. Yeah, solution focused and short term. And that resonated much more to me. While I was When I was reading an article in Psychology Today magazine, and there was a cutout in a class that I had about, take a video class on hypnosis. And I was always interested in hypnosis from at least a brief things I was exposed to in school, in grad school with it. Okay, well, let me take this video course. I was like, well, this is interesting. And one of the things that I became very interested in, which kind of maybe a bit conflict with clinical psychology, was past life regression work. So I was like, okay. And I saw that, in New York, where it was based at, they were doing a 3-day seminar on past life regression certification to be facilitator. So I signed up for it with no really, I mean, I had the basic hypnosis training from the video, but I never really, video series didn't really know, full on hypnosis. And I really enjoyed this 3-day seminar. And then I did an advanced 2-day follow up, like part two, like several months later. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, well, if I'm going to do this type of work, I should get certified in hypnotherapy, general hypnotherapy. So that same school, I enrolled in a 3-month, 160-hour, transpersonal hypnotherapy program. And this was in 2011. I was like, this makes 100% more sense in psychology, because it's short term. It's about getting people, from, needing help to be able to help themselves, empowering people to help themselves. And I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. So I immediately said, I'd rather do this than clinical psychology, or at least some type of coaching. At that time, I didn't know what I was still going to do yet. Now, I'm going to add even more to my plate now. I got hired full time to teach where I was teaching at, at the, in New Jersey Community College. Now, when you teach full time, your job is much more demanding. So now I have all three worlds coming together. And the way I kind of look at it now, because I did, further refinement on this, is I use more in my coaching or my, talking to people, conversation, than a traditional hypnotherapist does. I mean, sure, I can definitely do traditional hypnosis, but I like to integrate it in my coaching, and that's where I started studying NLP as well.
Wow. When you're working with someone, do you start with the hypnosis, or do you have a conversation? They say, "Oh, what are your biggest challenges?" I mean, is it
Yeah,
that
I
people
mean,
know what they're yeah.
most of it's having a conversation, figuring out
Mhm.
where they are at, what are their challenges, what are their limiting beliefs, and then go from there. Now, um, as an agent, traditional agent, which I still am now, and I've been doing this for 21 years now. Unless an actor really is asking for help, I don't. I'm always a big respecter of boundaries and ethics. So I'm not gonna do that unless they ask for any type of coaching, mindset coaching, unless they specifically are asking for it. But sometimes, if they're like, lamenting about their career, I can certainly start to point out and say, don't, do you see maybe the pattern of you getting in your own way here? Do you see how you maybe, this may be happening here? Did you ever notice this? And I ask it in questions rather than being prescribing mode, because one of the things that I always felt like a good coach or a good practitioner does is we help people get to their own solutions themselves. So a lot of times it's about asking sometimes the right questions to get them the wheels to start turning. So that rather than I guess that might be maybe my rebellion towards the clinical authoritarian approach, for more of a more of a paternal, warm, creative approach where it's like, okay, I can point you in this direction, but it's gonna be much more powerful if you start to arrive to those insights yourself.
Yeah, I can see that because you're empowering that person to find his or her answers
Yeah,
versus the God complex or I'm going to tell you, I'm going to write this script and I'm here for,
yeah.
that model is falling away because no one can know
Well,
exactly.
and nobody know. I mean, the whole thing. And plus, I think in human nature, we're meant to be kind of free spirited.
Mm.
That's why, if you corner us too much, we're going to rebel. And what gets really exciting about this work is sometimes when you watch people actually start coaching themselves, and I'm like, this is, I'm just going to sit and observe now because now it's like, okay, they're actually, empowered now to help themselves. And ultimately, I'm not looking for a lifetime customer. I'm not looking for someone who's going to be, we want people in our field to be able to get up and get out and not need us anymore. And that's the whole thing, because we know then, as you know, with social proof, we're going to get more referrals and more people are going to come to us if we've helped them. And so we're
And
going to
it
get more
feels
business that way
good
in the
to
long run.
see someone fly, right? It's
It
like
really does, and it's so
jump on.
rewarding, and it actually feels good when somebody says, and it may sound counterproductive, but it sounds or counterintuitive, but it sounds good when somebody says, "I don't really need you anymore. I can do this myself." Wonderful, spread your wings and go. And I'm here if you need me, but I want to see you soar. So, and that's where I feel hypnosis comes in great at is being able to do that. And um, now I still believe in traditional therapy. I still think it's important. I still think that. uh, Especially for more if there's a more of emotional baggage or trauma, that's where traditional psychotherapy can really be of immense value too. Uh, in addition, so I don't. I mean, obviously, there's certain limitations what hypnosis can treat and can work with. I mean, first of all, I don't want to say treat because we don't treat anybody. We coach, we empower, but treating kind of signifies a medical connotation, and we don't do that. We help, we manage, we help you manage. And sometimes, depending on the condition or the issue that you're seeking help with, we like to do that in conjunction with a doctor, a physician. Like, for example, if someone comes because, hypnosis is great for working with chronic pain. Well, if I'm going to work with someone who has chronic pain, I want to be really safe to know that they're under a doctor's care because in reality, pain is a signal to the brain, to the body, that something is wrong. So if you're not getting treat looked at by a doctor, I don't wouldn't know if really this pain is meant for you to get checked out or to look at something or a warning sign.
Mhm. Warning that they might need that might be a critical medical condition
Yeah,
that needs, acute
yeah.
care. Yeah,
Well,
that makes sense.
and this is just an extreme. I mean, and not to get too extreme or morbid here, but let's say somebody has chronic headaches. Now, I want to make sure that yeah, it could be stress, it could be tension, it could be that, but it could also be a brain bleed, a tumor. I want to make sure that that is ruled out beforehand because we're not medical doctors. We don't do that. So there's a scope of practice that we need to abide by and adhere to. So, we very much, at this case, are going to want a doctor's endorsement and signing off on that because, or any other type of issue, even if it's a deep-seated emotional issue, they still need therapy in addition to hypnotherapy and coaching. So, especially if there's like years of trauma or abuse or generational trauma, that can come in there.
So, would you know pretty quickly if that person had generational? Because I know sometimes people try to say, "Oh, it didn't affect me and I'm fine."
Well,
Like,
yeah,
it's all good.
yeah, I mean, people, generational trauma, I think, is kind of a newer discovery that we've been finding. I'd say in the past 5 to 10 years, but it kind of makes sense because when we experience a trauma, let's say firsthand, and we don't, it starts becoming baked in our neurology, and it wrapped up in our neurology, which then, if we let's say again, we pass on their genes to the next generation. Well, what happens, that neurology is encoded into their gene, and then that's encoded to their, the next generation gene. So we could be still dealing with our residual effects of like our grandparents or great grandparents' trauma, especially if they, at that time, in those generations, really therapy wasn't that widely available
Or even safe. I mean, look at what they used to do with lobotomies and the shock treatment.
yeah,
I mean, I'm not saying that that shock treatment is completely bad, but just applying,
yeah.
impulses
Well,
to the brain wantonly, that's dangerous. But if
yeah,
there's an area, there's a process, but it was barbaric what they used to do to people.
yeah,
And
and
I
plus,
wouldn't.
even just the therapy protocol now, electroshock therapy in 2025 is much different than one in
It's
the
much
40s
different,
and
right?
50s, and much more safer and protocol. Like I said, there are some benefits if it's severe cases, but only severe cases. And of course,
Right.
you have to get
Yeah.
testing beforehand to make sure that you have no underlying heart or neurological conditions that would prevent you from doing that. Because but yeah, I mean, so a lot of times, especially I'd say prior to even part of a Gen X generation is just, we were taught to kind of just tough it out and,
Mhm.
no pain, no gain, especially if you were a male. If you were a male, especially in most traditional, yeah, no, you had to be a man and tough it out,
Yeah, be
and
a man. Yeah, suck it up. Yep.
suck it up, be a
Totally.
man, and don't cry, don't be a sissy. And trauma affects both, males and females the same way.
Yeah, well, I've had a few guests have talked about that males actually have higher highs and lower lows with trauma. So it's almost more important for a male to express this because
Hmm.
physiologically they're having a different experience. It's more intense both ways. So and it's really interesting how this has come about, how we're learning how emotionally powerful all genders are, and we can't put anyone in a box. And
Of course, and
yeah.
that's but that just goes to show, like, and then again, if we don't resolve the trauma, because sometimes it may be temporarily easier to just put it in a box, a lid on it, and say, okay, I'm just gonna worry about that. I'm gonna move forward and not be worried, not be concerned about what the future's gonna hold. Let me just bury this, and no pain, no gain, and that sort of philosophy. Therefore, it's gonna come up in other ways. This is why, especially for men, we see a high rate of substance abuse, alcoholism, aggression, and those
Mhm.
can all be symptoms or masks for depression, sadness, feeling inadequate, and it's at that for most men, it's socially unacceptable to say talk about their feelings.
Yeah, to be, like, honest, like, I don't feel like I can deal with this.
Hmm.
Once you say that, you're like, "Oh, I just admitted that I don't feel like I can deal with this," and all of a sudden you have space to deal with it. But until you get that out, it's
Hmm.
it's like this boulder on your soul. And
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you, this came up when you were talking. Okay, so here's a metaphor. When we have our phone doesn't work right, our computer doesn't work right, any electronic, any kind of circuitry that doesn't work right, we turn it off and we turn it back on. And 99.9% of the time, that machine works better. The connections get cleared. So I'm just wondering, do you think there's some kind of parallel between hypnosis and like a reset of our neurology? Or
Yeah,
what do you
I
think is
mean,
the closest thing to powering down as a person?
Exactly. Well, that's where neurolinguistic programming was started in the 1970s, and it was they kind of based it on computer work. The founders of that were very much into science and math and all that. Um, I think this is why it was such a radical approach because it looked at it from a computer programming standpoint, the mind, and that was like quite controversial. How could you compare the computer to the mind? It's very similar, actually. Now, of course, it's much more powerful than just a simple 1-2 reset, but there are a lot of rapid approaches that can actually reset, you. And what we're starting to find out is, yeah, we can change the past, Like we can't change what happened to you, but what we can change is your perception of that. So, in other words, like let's say, you've been abused or you suffered a trauma in the past. We can't change that event. That event has happened, that event's over. What we can change is where you can look at it, instead of being every time you look at it or examine or get a sign from it, most people who are erupts of a trauma are going to get a visceral reaction, like they're back there again. Whereas now, if we kind of rewire that or reboot, as you say, now you can just look at that trauma and look at it like as a matter of fact of what you ate for breakfast last week. Like just that nonchalantly, like, oh yeah, this happened to me, but I don't blame. And also, especially if it's like abuse or other types of trauma, with sexual assault or abuse, there's often a lot of self blame there too. That's associated with that trauma. So part of that is obviously forgiveness to the perpetrator. And also what's very important after you forgive whoever wronged you, forgiving yourself is the next thing that is so important to do. And most people forget that. You need to forgive yourself. And I want to make one thing very clear because some people get a little confused. When I say forgiveness, I don't necessarily mean that you accept what the person did.
Right. You're
I
not
don't
saying it
mean
was okay. Yeah.
it's not okay. It's not
No, it's
okay
not
what
okay.
they did. What they did was not okay, and that also doesn't mean that you have to have any contact with that person ever again. Forgiveness just means that you take the emotional charge out of it. Because when you hold on to anger and resentment, what you're really doing is hurting yourself. It's like that famous expression when you hold on to resentment, it's like taking poison yourself and expecting the other person to get hurt by that. They're not. You're the only one that's going to get hurt. So this is where forgiveness comes in. It's not about the other person. It's about you. Because I know people who've will have no contact with their biological parent who might have been the abuser, but they forgive them, but they still they chose not to have any contact, and that's perfectly fine. I think in that aspect, if it's been that betrayal.
Right. Right. And it's a form of boundaries and self-care.
Yeah,
And maybe they could look at I just wanted to feel connected and loved, but that person didn't know how to do it, and that's okay. I'm gonna look for connection and love with somebody who deserves
yeah,
it.
and
You
also
look
I'm
at
gonna
them motivating.
yeah, you look at the motivating factor. It's like they did the best of what they could. They didn't have their best upbringing themselves. Most likely,
Mhm.
there was intergenerational abuse. Another reason why we got to look at generational trauma. So, but the also thing we want to do is build up the love within yourself, so that yeah, maybe we didn't get the love from this parent because your parent they didn't know how to,
Right, they just
eh,
didn't know.
they didn't know
Yeah.
how to. But we can now love ourselves, and then if we choose to become parents ourselves we now know how to love our children.
Yeah, and I say it's you're jumping a timeline. You're shifting because you could have stayed in the hurt and the victimhood, but now you're choosing this timeline of
Mhm.
empowerment, of change and restitution. I mean, how amazing would that be to correct an ancestral trauma and that's no longer part of the field?
Yeah, it's like with you, the buck stops here, and that's the whole purpose of that. That's a great place to be. This may have been a pattern for 2 or 3 generations, but now it stops here with me, and it takes work, and it this is where and part of like when you do this type of work, one thing to be prepared for is it may not always be pleasant. It's not always going to feel good at the
Mm.
time, but it's going to be very important to do.
It takes a lot of bravery and vulnerability and rawness. Wow. And but magic on the other side, like, whoo.
Mhm.
So what do you when you're working with people or your experience, what are the biggest fears or self-doubt that the trends that you see? And maybe if someone's like, well, I don't even know where to start. Like where would you start with somebody who is just a blank, sort of blank and they're so low they don't even know where to start.
Well, I think the first thing is just to be honest with yourself and, know that. that there's, some work that needs to be done, because a lot of people are walking around not realizing that they've, had this trauma, or not realize that they have been affected. So I think the first step is to celebrate the fact and be kind to yourself that you forgive this, you realize this, that this is happening. So that's the first step, is like, okay, first celebrate that victory, that you realize that you come to the insight that there is this issue that needs to be dealt with. Then you seek out whatever it is, a therapist, a coach that can help you start to process this, and then start to help you reframe, the past, or what we call rewriting the timeline, to a degree, where at least you're writing that internal script of, you're a survivor, you're not a victim, you're a survivor, you're a champion. And now, if once they do that, the next step is like, think of how much you can help other people. How great that, again, it doesn't seem like that, but it's like, well, how great was it that you went through this? Because now you can help so many other people.
Right. And it's like, did you suffer with self-doubt at all? But it seems like you dove into academics, and maybe you like the affirmation of grades and, that kind of
Hmm.
uh and I know that's why I like school. I got my master's in speech pathology, and I always loved taking a test. I was like, I'm just going to show, and you get a grade and you know that you did a good job. But real life, you don't get grades anymore, and you don't get
No,
that
there's no
affirmation.
grades. There's no grade report at the end. Well, I mean, even myself. I mean, I've dealt with my own self doubt for years. And it's always, and I think the one thing that's universal is we all go through it. We'll have our moments, and it's a lifelong process. Like, where you just have to constantly work at it, and realize that, again, sometimes our inner critic is not always correct, not always valid. It's just it's there to protect us. And it's designed to help us survive and help us live. And it does a great job of doing that. But, sometimes it can work in overdrive, and sometimes it can, work, incorrectly. But it's still there to do that. So the important thing, again, is to realize that, okay, this fear that I'm feeling, or this self-doubt, I know it's there to help me, but let's figure out other ways that it can help.
Identify. And then how would you, you take the jump. You're like, okay, I'm doing this. I got over my self-doubt. I got over my ego telling me that I'm not good enough. And then you're in the situation and you're getting this, attention. You maybe got the gig or whatever. You're in it, and then all of a sudden you're like, imposter syndrome. What am
Mhm.
I doing here? Like, I don't deserve this. I'm just here, and this isn't really me. Like, not. And how do you help people own that? Like, yes, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. How do
Yeah.
you get to that?
Well, I think that you're exactly where you're supposed to be when, first of all, you realize that this is not, your thoughts may not be necessarily, based on reality. That it might be fear talking to you, or hesitation. So that would be the first thing I would definitely say, to come to the realization that, fear not it's false evidence appearing real. That's what fear stands for, if you think about it.
I love
So,
that.
to realize that this may be false, what I'm thinking, most likely is, on some level, and let's deal with, this first thing, that this is just really fear talking. This is not reality talking. And now let's move past that. Again, then we were saying this even before we recorded, of how a lot of times our imagined worst case scenario, and we're great at that. We are great at, like, looking at, viewing ourselves as failing magnificently. Like, it's going to
Yeah.
be this grand, gesture, worldwide, gesture, that we're going to fail, and fail spectacularly. But even if it doesn't go our way, the situation, we try an idea, we try to do something, and it doesn't exactly go as planned, it's still never as bad as we imagine it to be. It's never as severe as we imagine it to be. Because, again, we're great at imagining these grand gestures of failing.
I know it's always interesting because the human psyche seems to think that we're the center of everything, and everyone's looking at you. Everyone sees you stumble. Everyone, no,
Yeah,
people are
and
not paying attention. They don't notice there's a booger hanging off the end of your nose. They
yeah,
don't,
and most of the
unless it's a
time,
huge piece of cilantro, they're not going to notice anything in your teeth, and
yeah.
nobody really cares.
Well, that's liberating. I know may sound harsh for some people, but that's really liberating. Nobody cares. I do this, 'cause I talk a lot in my classes. I don't really have my students do speeches, but they often talk about they dread doing presentations, and I often reframe them like, nobody cares what you're saying up there. But, maybe the professor is there evaluating you, but that's about it. Because the other students, they're not. They're either worried about what they're about to go next, or they're relieved that they want, or they're beating themselves up over things that they said in their own presentation. They're not even paying attention to you.
Yeah. And I've found like through, I'm 52 years old and I've done some public speaking and I've put myself out there. And to me, my best experiences is when I was just in a good energy state. It didn't even matter what I said or did. It was the energy that was coming off of me.
Hmm. And it's all about the energy too that you give off. And what I often like to say, especially with actors, because stage fright is a real thing, that
Hmm.
um I say, well, let's look at the physiological signs of stage fright, the butterflies in your stomach, the heart beating faster, sometimes
Your
you a little bit of
hands sweating.
your hands sweating. But at the same at the same time, those are the same markers of excitement.
Yes.
So instead of like mentally, because that's where it comes in, or because we start to experience this mentally, we go, "Oh, I'm nervous. This is that. I know this is going to go bad." But what if we change it to, "I'm excited to go up there now. I'm excited to showcase." I think because anytime you go into an unknown situation, especially with a stage you've never been on, it's common to experience. I remember even reading this in a public, when I took public speaking back in the late '90s, that even the first chapter, first intro, first chapter was, if you think that public speaking classes are going to help you rid completely of your fear, that's not going to happen. That's because even the most established speakers get a little worked up before they get on stage.
Yeah.
So
Why do you think I do my intention before I start my podcast? Like I have to
yeah,
ask for divinity. I'm like, I just gotta just embrace where I am, be
yeah,
present, and, that's
and
how
that's
I
where it's
feel
like,
at the stage, right?
let's use
Yeah.
it to help us do better. Because when we start looking at this excitement, the adrenaline kicks in, and now we're doing better than we could have. Because
Mhm.
now instead of holding us back, it actually adds fuel to our presentation. So
Yeah,
let's
and
use
also
that.
athletes can use that. I know my kids both play competitive tennis, and someone told them that too. It's like, it's the same nervousness is the same as excitement. So it goes anything that you really wanna do well, you're excited about.
Yes, right, absolutely.
Like my friend Rebecca Marcus, she clears it out. She's like,
Yeah, that
"I'm
that clearing
excited."
most coincidentally, this is why like energy work and Reiki is so powerful, because of it is clearing out. I mean, we are energy. Like, because a lot of people are skeptical, at least in my environment. You hear energy work and they're like, "Ugh." And I'm like, well, do you ever walk into a room with somebody who's negative and then you just want to walk right back out? I'm like, what do you think that's causing that feeling? The energy, the aura, that they didn't say anything. They just walked in. It's like all of a sudden you just feel that I got to get out of here. Why do you think you feel that way? Because it's the energy of the room.
Well, you've given my audience lots to think about and action steps. I mean, this kind of work is worth it.
It
And
sure
I
is.
can I can raise my hand and say yes. I mean, I've done past life regressions. I've had coaches. I've been rejected by coaches. I had a coach drop me. Can you believe the kind of I had such shame about my coach dropping me, and she didn't even tell me. She just stopped contacting me.
Yeah, that's
Um,
a little on the
and
unprofessional
I had
side.
to deal with that. You know what I mean? Like, and I had to really say, what is this about? And I figured it out. And it's okay. Like, I forgive her. But yes, it was very unprofessional. I prepaid and just like, and I was like, I texted her, I said, I've really learned a lot about discernment. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and because a lot of times, I think what's very important if we're going to look to a coach that they've got to work through their own, you know, baggage too, because,
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of fantastic coaches out there, but also the reality is it's not a regulated business. So,
right. Yeah,
you know,
and I didn't mean negative about coaches. I was just saying I've walked the walk. I've done like,
yeah,
I know where you're coming from, and this
yeah,
kind of
I
is worth
totally get
it.
it.
Yeah.
I've had with strategy calls with some coaches. I'm just like, hang on the phone, like that was off. Something was off
You
there.
have to use discernment, right? So people like
Because you're
yeah,
investing not only just money, but your time, your energy,
right.
your focus, and it's something you can't get back. So it's good to shop around, and not to accept the first one. I mean, one of the things I often talk a lot about is the ability to say no. The
Mhm.
ability to say no and walk away without feeling guilty. Being guilt free by saying no, learning to say no. And the same thing with like actors accepting roles. It's okay sometimes to say no because you have to protect your own integrity at the end of the day.
Yeah, I can tell you, and we're getting short on our time right now, but, I was listening to Tom Selleck's memoir,
Mhm,
and what a beautiful memoir, and he that was one thing consistent through his career was his integrity.
mhm,
Even I mean, he was offered the Indiana Jones position before Harrison Ford, but he already had a commitment. He had the Hawaii commitment
mhm.
and couldn't do it. And there are certain roles he's like, "I don't identify with this role," and he didn't do it, but it would have been good money when he needed the money.
Oh
So
yeah,
I
and it could have been more financially lucrative than the Hawaii. It was his integrity, it was his interest, and that's
oh,
at the end
yeah,
of the
in the
day, that's what's going to make you more fulfilled when live your life with integrity and hold to your integrity.
right, and all the veterans, the Vietnam vets that were felt isolated and unseen, and he illuminated, a small part of the mental trauma that these soldiers go through and their families go through, and he was recognized for that,
Hmm.
so it just always works out when you follow your heart. So that's really a big message here for Life of Love, and so I love to celebrate that.
Hmm. Yeah. Sure. Well, you can definitely go to my website, albertbramante.com. And you can also find me on, I mean, all the socials, medias. I have Instagram, LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to, chat with you. Also encourage you to check out my book, Rise Above the Script. It's on Amazon and also Audible. So check that out.
Nice. Well, that's great. I'm so happy you're contributing that and celebrating that too. Oh, this has been such a delight. Thank you,
Well,
Albert.
thank you, Julie, for having me on here.